So let's get started. First, welcome for being here. Everybody can take a breather, right? Because the hardest step was actually saying, I want to do this. And I want to learn how to be a better ally, or I just want to learn more things about, am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong? Or sometimes you're just caught in between. So actually stepping outside of your comfort zone and saying, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to give it my all is actually a phenomenal step. So welcome, 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 welcome. I definitely want to make sure we recognize our partners who made this happen. So first, I definitely want to give Angie an opportunity to really talk a little bit about her and her organization. And then I'll come back and then introduce our next partner. Angie?
Hey Jay, thank you so much. You know what? I don't feel the need to talk about my organization. I want to talk about your organization. I just want to thank you, Jay, for taking the time and literally committing your life to sharing the things that we're talking about today. I know a lot of us white people out there have recently heard a lot of people saying, you need to go educate yourself. And the Black community's tired. They're exhausted, understandably. They don't want to talk. They don't want to be having these conversations over and over again because, like any trauma that someone experiences, the more you talk about it, the more you're reliving it, I'm imagining, right? So I think a lot of us completely want to respect that. And the fact that you're coming forward and you're saying, hey, I saw your quote, Jay. You said, I will talk to white people about this till I'm blue in the face. And you said, I want to be part of this conversation. And that has been the mission of Love is a Parable. And I'll let you explain your own mission. But I've been so grateful for your openness and willing to let us ask questions. And I absolutely also agree that we need to educate ourselves. There's so many materials out there that we can learn from. But being able to have this dialogue is just such a blessing. So thank you for doing this for us. So we're grateful to you.
Not a problem. Thank
This
you.
is my husband, David, if you haven't met him yet, everybody. So.
Hey, David, good seeing you again, too.
Yeah, you too.
And now we're going to bring up our next partner, Garrett Rasick.
Hey y'all, my name is Garrett Razik. I'm a resident of Holly Springs now for just over 5 years. Live here with my wife, Emily, and my 18-month-old Theodora, and my 3-year-old Oliver. You might see the 18-month-old at some point, just a heads up. But yeah, I was a former elementary school teacher up in Newark, New Jersey. I got an MBA in nonprofit management, and now work for a nonprofit down here in Durham that works on building equitable and inclusive economies. But outside of all that professional work, I'm actively engaged in community organizing. When I came to Holly Springs, I tried my best to learn all about the history as much as I could, researching how forms of injustice played out in terms of where infrastructure was built, monuments that were built, where landfills and quarries were placed. And so I got really involved in issues of gentrification and housing, and I'm continuing to organize with a number of groups across Wake County on some of those efforts. And I'm just really honored to be here with y'all to listen, learn, and engage. So thanks, Jay, for having us.
Thank you. Another, not necessarily a partner, but a great supporter, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my CEO of the company that I work for, Set and Service Resources, and our founder, Eric Hanvey, actually is on tonight. And he also was gracious enough to allow us to use Ring Central to serve this, because he said he definitely wants to make sure that he's helping us, and he allowed us to use the Ring Central platform. So I definitely want to say thank you formally to Eric, like I always do, because he's been a big supporter of Love is a Parable since he first found out about it. So there is a history fact, guys. Today marks exactly 3 years ago to the date that Angie and I did our first performance together. We made history then because she talked a lot about the race relationships in Holly Springs even back then. And so it's funny, when I told her, I said, do you realize what today is? And it's just confirmation that today was meant to be, that here we are again, talking about race relationships and the growth of what needs to take place. So, yep, that's our little history fact. Now, about Love is the Parable, I definitely want to make sure that you guys know that there is an entire board that is actually helping me make decisions. And I am blessed enough to be able to do this alongside my wife and close friends. And we have been doing this for 3 years. In a couple of days, 4 days, it will be our 3rd year anniversary as well. Angie made us start 6 months ahead of time by wearing the shirt early. And so that's why it's about my anniversary. But also we have an advisory committee. They are ones who are basically helping us branch out. They are people who are experts in their field, in their area, and they work with us to make sure the things that we have as a board, that it really is effective. So this is what I like to call our little dream team, because they assist us in making sure things are done. And then our vision is simple. A lot of people think that we just started this with the implicit bias workshop. No, we've been doing this for a very long time. And we believe that we can live in a world of unity, and we believe love is the key to get us there. And our whole mission is to promote unity, love, and random acts of kindness while providing love education like this workshop. Love advocacy, once you really get a clear understanding to go and advocate to do those things of love. And of course, love wellness. We believe that love will help you heal as you continue to operate and exercise in it. And our core values are unity, love, and kindness. As you can see, everything is focused on what it takes to help us be that collective we. Okay, I have only one ground rule throughout this entire workshop. And that ground rule is to be open. And not just any open. There's an Aramaic term called afatha. And this means be opened. And what I like about this term is that it reminds you that there was a point that you were open and receptive to a lot of things. So it reminds you to be opened because there were a point when you were open. But this is not just any open, but a feeling, a freeing thought, a healing thought, a word that releases all tension, doubt, fear, or uneasiness in consciousness and opens the mind and the body to receptivity and wholeness. So it's very important because we're going to have a tough conversation. So a lot of people ask, why are we doing 3 days? Because the truth of the matter is this is a heavy topic. And if we try to rush it, we might miss a vital point. But also, this may be a little uncomfortable for me because it is rehashing some of my experiences. It's a little uncomfortable for you because it may be divulging some of the experiences that you have encountered or some of the things you're unclear about. So we must be open and be committed to getting through this together as a team. And the only way that can happen is if we ask questions, if we incite, or if we engage one another. But we have to be open to whatever happens and know that it's going towards that path, towards unity. Okay? Now here are our objectives. Inspiring mindful practices, leveraging individual concerns, inciting togetherness. If you notice, that spells implicit. I know I'm corny like that. And then the last one is building intentionally aware societies. So we want to make sure that as we go out, one of the things that annoyed me all the time when I did any type of civic type responsibilities or duties is when you had outsiders coming in and telling you what your community needs. Well, I believe that the only ones who know what the community needs are those who reside in that community. So when we become aware of things, we know best how to implement those things in our society. So we definitely want to make sure that we achieve those objectives. And then the outcomes. To build skill sets so residents can address bias in action. Yep, holding one another accountable. And then foster community buy-in. We want to continue to spread this so that other people can say, okay, this is how we have inclusion and diversity, cultural diversity in our community. And then, of course, create a safer... I'm sorry? and of course, create a safer living environment for all. Okay? So now we're into day 1. I will tell you, if you have questions or if you have a question that's really getting to you, please use the chat feature. And if you have to interrupt me, it's okay to interrupt me. I do want to get some of those questions answered because I know you have a lot of those questions. But today we're going to talk about disengaging and disarming our sacred box. Okay, so what is our sacred box? It's a place that we've created to protect our most valuable experiences, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, feelings, and anything else we believe to be sacred. Guys, this is probably one of the toughest things to uncover because now you're dealing with the core of who we are, our foundation. So Nipsey Hussle, a slain rap artist, said an amazing quote, and it just resonates with me over and over again, and I find myself repeating it. He said, "We're not the cause, we're the effect." Anybody, tell me what you think that means. Just one person, if you're the first person to speak up, just tell me what that means to you. Anybody? Do I have to call some names?
Attitude reflects leadership.
Okay. Attitude reflects leadership.
I got that from Remember the Titans.
Okay. Eric, what do you think? Payback.
Can you hear me?
So, is that me or you? Yeah. So yeah. So basically, we're not the reason we're here. We're basically we're here, but we're not the reason.
Right. A lot of us are in a place where we think who we are and the things that we do are directly related to the choices that we make. And a lot of times, the choices that we make are a reaction to a cause that is already existing. The reason why it's so difficult for a lot of us to identify racism is because it is in our culture, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So there are so many things that are going on right now, and we think that we're in charge, but we're really not. We have learned to respond to our environment. As we respond to our environment, it shapes certain behaviors that we later define as culture. So we are in effect. Now, if you even bring it more, thinking about the recent events, a lot of times we focus on the damage versus the reason why the damage occurred in the first place. Sarah said, we're the product of our environment. Definitely. Definitely, we can take it there. But a lot of us, we are now in a reactionary society where it's in our instinct to respond, to react to something first, versus saying, okay, where is that root? Where is that cause to the things that we believe? So who am I is a question that we need to ask a lot. A lot of times when we answer the question of who we are, it's usually based off of someone else's thoughts, because we are a product of what we've experienced. Like she said, the environment, and the things that we've been introduced. Much of our practices have roots, but we spend a lot of our time focused on the branches because it's easier to deal with the branches of a situation, because a lot of us say, okay, if the symptoms go away, the disease go away. One of the hardest things to do is deal with the roots. Because when you start dealing with the roots, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position to uproot your foundation. And for some strange reason, we go to an extreme approach of if this, then that. Well, if that's the case, that means mom was wrong, or that means dad was wrong, or that means pastor was wrong, or that means this. Like, no, let's not even go there yet about passing blame. We just need to acknowledge the things that we were exposed to. I had a good friend speak to me in private, and he said, Jay, I have to be honest. I don't know if I'm a racist or not. And I said, why? He said, because all my life, my dad said, don't bring anybody black home. And we grew up in a society where you just listened to whatever your parents said. And so I assumed, there was a reason he said it. And so I never went around black people. He never questioned why his dad said it. It was one of those things his dad said, and guess what happened? He just did what his dad said. Do I think he's a racist? No. Do I understand tradition? Most definitely. Now, are we a product of probably a racist culture? Definitely. But all he has to do is go back to his root of saying, okay, why do I avoid black people? Oh, because my dad told me to. Dad, why do I avoid black people? A lot of us are afraid to even have that conversation because we tend to go to the extremist approach first. What do I value and why? Have you ever noticed you could be in what seems to be a sensible conversation with someone, and it seemed like you say one or two words and all of a sudden the conversation shifts, where it's become intense, or it's becoming like the person is becoming enraged or angered for some strange reason? Typically, those emotional shifts happen when you're touching someone's sacred box. It could be you. There are certain trigger words that send you just straight over the roof. For whatever reason, it upsets you, and you've never taken the time to say, okay, now why does that bother me? And here's the thing, we have gotten to a place where we feel like we're supposed to tell everybody our business. You actually are not. Like, you're just supposed to know that you have a sacred box and what's in your sacred box and why it's there. If you want to share it with people, that's fine. But when you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, you can say, you know what, this is why it's uncomfortable for me. And you can tell the person either, excuse me, or could we change the subject? Nothing is wrong with that. Karen said, doesn't everyone have at least one trigger? Yeah, I believe we have more. I believe we have probably about at least 10. Because you got to think, it's certain things that happen through us through time. I always tell the story for the first 7 years of me and my wife's marriage. Every time she would walk out the door, I'd be like, what, you want a divorce? It's funny now, but she's like, no, I'm just taking a minute to cool off. But because I was so divorce conscious, meaning I was so fearful that our relationship was going to fail because that's all I knew. Anytime we had a disagreement and she walked away, I felt like she was walking out of my life. That was uncovered in counseling. And so now when my wife walks out of the room after a heated discussion, she'll say, hey, I'm just going in the other room. And that's comfort for me. See, everybody has something that they value. And now you got to know why. So when things happen, you don't escalate the situation, because when you go near that sacred box, it exaggerates what's really happening. Trust me, it really does. What am I feeling? We're taught since we were so young, keep your feelings out of it. No, put your feelings in it. Because if you feel something, there's a reason. Your feelings are part of your natural instinct, which is your first defense mechanism. So if you feel something, you should do your due diligence to say, why do I feel this way? See, we've been so conditioned to deny ourselves that when our body is telling us like, hey, something is wrong, we choose not to listen because that's part of the conditioning. How do we know this? When we first come into the world, right? Our first 2 years is filled of no, stop, don't do that. Leave that alone. Leave it alone. No, no. And so we're teaching them like safety is the end goal, but at the same time, we're also teaching them to deny their natural instincts. And so as you go through life, your community becomes larger, and you start listening to other people to guide you and tell you things. But what it's telling you is that, hey, your voice is not good enough to protect you. You need to listen to the community voice, and we'll tell you. So we now, by the time we're 17 or 18, we have been conditioned to not listen to our natural instinct, listen to our feelings, because we are told, like, somebody else has a better choice or a better decision. And so now we're going to say, stop that, because that's part of your foundation. A lot of times we are upset when we feel like we can't express ourselves because we have been restricted emotionally for so long. So I say, if you're feeling something, find out why. You deserve to recognize that. What do you believe? Or what do I believe? There are several things that I believe. And there are several convictions that I have. It's not your responsibility to explain to anyone, but it's your responsibility to know why. Natanya said, feelings have their place and need to be recognized. And Angela said, we need to be curious about our feelings. Trust me, if you sit into a room and you find yourself feeling uncomfortable, there's a reason why, and it'll reveal more to you than you even know. The problem is not the branches, the problem is the root. It's what's feeding those branches. And so we definitely want to make sure we're getting to a place where we want to recognize those things. Why do I care? There are things you care about and things you don't. There are things that matter to you. Like right now, why is it so important to be an ally? Why is it so important to say, I need to be in a position to impact and influence change? Why do I care, and why do I care now? Did I always care? Or did it become important to me now? Why did it become important? What happened to make me take notice? I was actually talking to Carla earlier today, and I was telling her, one of the aha moments for me is that I was one of those Blacks who thought that we progressed so much. I thought that racism was at a place where it was really dwindling away. I thought there was some outliers, but for the most part, we were really in a more progressive, unified state. And that's because, I was working in higher ed, and I've been in leadership for the last 15, 16 years. So I really thought people who were serving me and doing things for me, they were doing them for me because they were good people. Because the thing is, I have been actually in leadership since I was 19. So my whole professional career started in leadership in higher ed. And I was like, hey, these people are nice and we're doing a lot of great things. But when I really dealt with racism and I had to realize it actually took somebody else to tell me you're a victim of racism. I'm like, no, couldn't be. We did this together, this, and that. And the realization of racism, it nearly crushed me. Because part of my foundation was telling and helping other Blacks that, hey, racism is something of the past. So when you realize that racism still exists, you realize a portion of your life was disillusioned. And that's hard to deal with because now you feel like you were a hypocrite and you may have added more harm than help. A lot of us struggle with that once they come into the realization of feeling guilty. Then I felt that I was inadequate to speak on certain things because I was a fool or I was blind to things for so long. So when you get to that moment of caring, or you get to that moment of feeling, or you get to that moment of valuing, now as I go forward, that's probably why I'm able to talk to so many people about it, because I was ignorant to it too. as a Black person, I was ignorant to it too. So if I was ignorant to it, naturally somebody who isn't Black will be ignorant to a lot of things. But I'd rather have the conversation where we can get it right, still holding on to those feelings of how I felt when I really had that aha moment, you know? Alex said he felt the same way, but he's not Black. But he felt that racism, when the realization of racism happened, he went through something similar. Sarah said that is a hard realization, and the desire to right a wrong is strong. Yes, not being directly exposed leads us to a false sense. Yes. And the funny thing is, I've always wondered why so many people, in my professional career for the most part, up until recently, I was always the only Black or the only Black male. And so I thought that just came with the territory. So I looked back and realized I was educating a lot of people on Blackness and didn't know it. But we all have that sacred box. We all have things that are important to us, and that's where our triggers are housed. And anytime someone comes near that sacred box, we do everything in our power to protect it. Some of us shut down. Some of us become combative. Some of us argumentative. Some of us become violent. So it's very important to make sure you recognize your sacred box. And what are those values that are within them? It's for you to understand. That's why implicit bias exists, because it's something that's within our subconscious, something that we're not even paying attention to, but it's ingrained in us. So tell me your thoughts when you hear this statement. Americans are more divided than ever, gridlocked over social issues, race, gender, and the economy. Do y'all believe it's true?
Yes.
Okay, who said that?
That's me, it's Cordell.
Oh, okay. You would agree. Okay. So do you want to add to it or no?
I mean, I think that statement really just describes the current climate, whether it's outspoken or whether it's just something that is unsaid. It still describes the climate very accurately.
Right. Sometimes Natanya says she feels she would agree, and then Karen says sometimes she feels it's too big to fix. Sarah said, I think that realizing the divide brings us closer. And Garrett said, I would disagree with it. I just think the divisions that existed are surfacing more. I think gridlock is the crux of it. Gotcha. I actually can see why you say that, because we'll talk about it later. Racism is so ingrained within our culture that there are certain things like, is it being exposed? Or is it just that we have eyes on it or lenses on it? Meaning now we have capability of recording it. Will Smith said it's been around forever and now we just have phones. So it's so many different ways that we can look at it. And it's getting beautiful in there. People confuse politics with showing humanity. They use politics to explain every action that they have instead of moving past the political ideology. I think it's what we see and experience. For instance, I have two daughters that are teenagers who have all kinds of friends. One of them actually said to me, Mom, you didn't teach about racism. You talked about equality and we're all human. You know, that's one of those beautiful luxuries that a lot of us don't have, because we have in Black culture what is called the talk. Unfortunately for my two little girls who are now 8 and 10, they both were introduced to racism in kindergarten because they were introduced to Martin Luther King, and in the book it talked about Blacks being mistreated. Then my oldest was called the N-word in first grade. That was here, you know, right here. in town, modern day. And so we wanted to raise our kids on not seeing the color of their skin, but unfortunately, we had to have that harsh conversation with them about you will be judged. You know, so we don't get the luxury. Unfortunately, every Black person wakes up knowing that they're Black. We're reminded that we're Black everywhere that we are, everywhere that we go. You know, so that's one of those things that is so ingrained within our culture that we don't have the luxury not to, because if we don't have that conversation, we could potentially say certain things that can be damaging, or we could put our children in harm's way by not preparing them how they should conduct themselves in certain environments. If we truly believe all humans are equal, then disparity in condition can only be the result of, systemic discrimination. I never taught the difference between racism and equality, and I never thought it as a luxury. This is eye-opening, thank you. No problem. A lot of us, that's probably the biggest thing. Like, one of the things that I do, I was taught at 19 years old when I enter a room to smile, because if I just went in there straight face, I would be perceived as intimidating. And so at 6 feet, nearly 6 feet tall, big dude, been my whole life, I was perceived as intimidating. Like, I was told all the time, you need to smile, you need to smile. And so when I got into leadership, I was told that people wouldn't come to me because they feared, they were afraid of me. That was a nice way of saying, you know, my Black was intimidating. So now when I walk into a room, I have to know my position, be mindful of my presence that I come in when I come into the room. Yeah, I do smile all the time. But now I smile all the time. But so I can't, the funny thing is I can't have bad days because it'll be perceived as me being angry. I can't be serious, it'll be perceived as me being angry. And so we're told that. And so Black men are told how to code switch when they go into an environment to make whites feel as less threatened as possible. So if you want to survive, you will be able to. Okay? I have been told that too, and I'm a short white woman. Well, you must be mean. Let me stop. So let's talk about cultural diversity. We hear that a lot, cultural diversity and cultural divergence. We hear about cultural diversity a lot. We hear about inclusion a lot. But there's a part of that that people forget. When we talk about cultural diversity, we talk a lot about, actually the true definition is the existence of a variety of cultural and ethnic groups. What we've added to this is the awareness and the appreciation of the existence of a variety of cultural and ethnic groups within a society. This is probably one of the areas that all of us are guilty of. We assume all Blacks are the same, we assume all whites are the same. One of the great things about being in America is that it is truly a melting pot. And every little pocket has either its own dialect, its own language, its own traditions, its own culture. That's what makes us beautiful and great people to be around. But we lack the awareness and the appreciation. We just assume. My wife taught me a lot about appreciating culture, because my wife is from the low country of South Carolina, where it is known as the Geechee Gullah area. There is a dialect, there is a language that they have. And so my wife doesn't like speaking because she doesn't like for her accent to come out, but I think her accent is one of the most beautiful things. But I remember the day that I was ignorant. I remember she was talking to the kids and she said, "You eat all?" I say, "Eat all? What's that? You mean, do they eat all of their food?" And I didn't realize that I just added to that stigma. That's why she don't like speaking publicly. And I added to it because I was ignorant. Thinking that it's funny, and it wasn't. That added insult to injury. And so now I want her to teach the kids that language because it is very important. It's part of who we are as Americans, and it's part of my children's heritage to know that. They need to know that they're Kusaw Indian. They need to know all of that. But society just looks at her as a 5'2" Black woman, but she's a 5'2" Black woman with culture that is important. People go down and visit Charleston and they go to the Gullah Festival, but they don't really talk about the Gullah people. And so that was one thing that I was really guilty of, and a lot of us are. In the Holly Springs, Fuquay, in the Raleigh-Durham area, it's so many different cultures, so many different people from so many different walks of life. You can have somebody from the mountains. I'm from Georgia, and we say it correctly, from the Appalachian Trail. They got a dialect. You can have some people from the Sand Hills. You can have people from Middle Georgia. You can have people from the lowest part of Georgia. And all of them have different accents, and they all have different cultures. And we fail to believe a lot of that. My wife says she was taught in elementary school to code switch. And code switch is a nice way of saying whatever you do, assimilate to be white as possible. So they taught them how to speak, quote unquote, white, or speak close to the broken King's English, if you will. But if you didn't do it well, you kind of was shunned for that. And said, I did the same thing with my Black friends as a teenager. I never heard of that phrase. Yeah, what, code switching, Karen? Yeah, because usually it's what non-whites have to do, because white is the standard. And so non-whites have to assimilate to be as white as possible in actions to be perceived as acceptable or non-threatening. So that's why we talk about the beauty of subcultures, because everybody brings something. And if we really say that we want culture diversity, we have to remove assumptions. That's why I talked a lot about the sacred box. Because in your sacred box is where your foundation is. The way that you respond to things, the way that you act, if you don't deal with your sacred box, everything that you do externally is really not genuine. Because the root is where the issues lie. So we gotta be able to say, if I want culture diversity, you have to also want to be aware of those different cultures, but then appreciate them too. We fail to appreciate a lot of those things. Then there is culture divergence, which refers to the separation of a once whole society or cultural groups into new distinctive factions. That happens quite a lot. And the funny thing is, people don't realize the role that, or the impact of gentrification actually plays in that. Holly Springs, if you really study the history of Holly Springs alone, it did that. So we want to get to a place where our culture is to appreciate culture diversity. Not to force people to assimilate, or not to force people to let something go in order to be accepted and or acceptable. America has a lot of racism, but few actual racists. Come on, talk to me. Somebody talk to me. Anybody?
I think they have a lot of both.
Yeah. I think it's racism. Like there's racist things we do. There's racist things we do all the time. I would say where we're participating in some type of racism, but I'm not a racist. I'm not going to point somebody out and say we got to do something to that person because of the color of their skin.
Okay. Natanya said we have to be careful about perspective and perception. I mean, Angela said this. We have to be careful about perspective and perception because those guide our decisions. How do we get people to investigate their own? How do we put those things in check when having a bad day? That's an easy one. A lot of us lack the ability to just be honest. If you're having a bad day, say you're having a bad day. A lot of us just don't know how to do that. So most of us will say, hey, how you doing? Like, I'm good, I'm doing good. No, if you're not doing well, say, I'm kind of having a bad day today, but I'm gonna get through it. And then say, you know what? I'm not in the best frame of mind to make a decision. When I'm in meetings and I have to make a decision and I'm not 100% sure, I say, I don't know, let me think about that. We don't have to force ourselves into anything, and that goes back to that sacred box. That is a habit that came from somewhere, a behavior that came from somewhere, and we kind of need to find out, where is that? Where is it housed? Natanya says she disagrees that with the statement. She said there are actual races. It said there are actual races. Karen said they don't even realize they're working with ingrained beliefs. Natanya said races are in positions of power. Garrett said, I agree that it's a lot of both, but I think racism has evolved over time, making it easier to claim something isn't racist. Wayne's racism, prejudice plus power. Melissa said, most people don't consider themselves to be racist. However, we have ingrained bias. We have to examine ourselves. However, there are openly racist people as well, and they seem to have become more open about it recently. I found that quote, and I couldn't find it earlier. I found that quote I couldn't find for you earlier today. And then Brian said, as a society, we conform to social norms, politicized opinions that are rooted in racist ideology, yet marked as America. We turn a blind eye to many things that do not directly affect us. There are racists for sure, but racism is practiced daily within our groups. I just feel like this means there are a lot of policies in place that impact people of color disproportionately. Someone may think that they aren't a racist, but still think whenever policies are in place are hurting some people, but helping others, whites. This is a whole spectrum. People who don't think they are racist, but still have bias all the way to openly racist. I agree. I agree with a lot of the things that you guys are saying, but I will say that the biggest struggle is probably explaining racism to those who exhibit racism, because it's painful. It puts us in a very victimizing, blacks, in a very victimizing position, because it's like, I'm hurting, but I got to explain to you why I'm hurting, but be sensitive to your feelings why I'm hurting. So a lot of times the frustration comes because why aren't you sensitive to my feelings to understand? And we're going to talk about those terms, and that's why, but racism or racist has also become a trigger word for those who are actually racist, but for those who just don't know that they're ignorantly doing or conducting biased behavior. So now when people hear racist, they freeze up, they actually shut down. They don't listen to anything because now they're defending, I am racist. I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist. And that's all they hear is, I'm not a racist, because the idea of realizing that you are racist is now making you feel like your whole moral compass is crushed.
So Jay, I don't mean to be rude, I'm gonna jump in and back you up on what you just said.
Okay.
When you and I talked earlier, I told you that I'm reading White Fragility, and I swear this book is perfect because everything I say, then I go to this book and it confirms like some of the things that I just talked about. The author says our simplistic definition of racism as intentional acts of racial discrimination committed by immoral individuals engenders a confidence that we are not part of the problem and that our learning is thus complex, or excuse me, our learning is thus complete. And then she goes on to say that in the post-civil rights era, we have been taught that racists are mean people who intentionally dislike others because of their race. Racists are immoral. Therefore, if I'm saying that my readers are racist, or even worse, that all white people are racist, I'm saying something deeply offensive. I'm questioning my readers' very moral character. And I think that speaks to what you were just saying. I think that's one reason why people take such offense when we might even suggest that they're racist, because they feel like we are attacking them as a person and not the comment that they made or the belief that they have.
Thank you for that, Carla. And I will add to that. Okay, so what if you are a racist? Now that you've realized it, it doesn't have to be permanent. Just because you realize you are a racist doesn't mean you have to always be a racist. Realizing it and getting to that point of saying, oh, I'm a racist. Now fix it. But we spend most of our time defending whether or not you are a racist versus not becoming a racist or no longer being a racist. So if we're exercising that much to prove a point, the only person that truly knows if you're a racist or not is really yourself. Because you can really today act as an ally and be a racist. Let's be honest. You're the only one to know. That's why I say deal with that sacred box. Because once you are able to be honest with yourself, that's when you can start making a change. We have put too much weight in the wrong actions. What is more beautiful to say, to be a racist and defend it, and defend it, be like, I'm not a racist, I'm not, or to say, ooh, I once was a racist, but I'm not now. And I call other people out on their racist crap. Because when you go through that whole realization of confronting self and dealing with self, you come out a different type of fighter. You come out a different type of person. Right now, it's holding up progress because you're defending it. I had this conversation with Angie. I told you the story how Angie made us start 6 months prematurely by wearing our shirt early. For the first 8 months of Love is a Parable, we were an all-white organization. As soon as Angie started her organization and her attention went elsewhere, the white people went with her. And then I became an all-black organization. And then all the blacks who were advising me or who were in leadership type roles or positions, they were like, Love is a Parable is too black. You need to switch it up. You got to make sure that the white people are welcome. And I said, nope, because I'm tired of using stock images. I'm going to give the people what the truth. If I'm an all-black organization right now, I'm an all-black organization. The whites are on there. They just further down the photo gallery because they were at the beginning. But here it is now in 2020. Now we're more mixed. I mean, all the white people came out of nowhere. I was like, where y'all come from? But it was Angie who made a post, and she came. And the more white people came. See, this goes to our implicit bias. Because what happens a lot of times with implicit bias, we cling to what's familiar. Clinging to what's familiar or what is comfortable for us can later be discrimination as we grow. We're thinking, oh, well, Angie goes to my church, or oh, she's on this group, or I love this and I love this about Angie, and we're friends. But why didn't that Black organization catch your attention before that? That's really the effect of implicit bias. Nobody meant any harm. Nobody meant anything wrong. But if I was solely dependent on the whites when we first started 8 months ago, in the beginning of the 8 months of our organization, we might have not been here today. But we didn't. We just adapted and maneuvered and realized people are people. And then when it came again, Angie and I had a long conversation about it. She's like, I never paid it any attention. That's the beautiful luxury. You don't. Now, the reason it was so funny, I got more whites, and then we got also more Blacks. Angie made that post. We went from 2,700 followers to now we have over 3,100. And that was only about three weeks ago. That was because implicit biasness exists on both spectrums. Blacks are even looking for whites to validate them in certain areas. And whites cling to what's familiar. Brian said, I told myself for years that I was culturally prejudiced. It took recent events for me to realize that what I perceived as social prejudice were in fact racial. And it was heartbreaking. I don't want to have hate like that in me. Thank you, Brian. And you don't have to. You've acknowledged it now. Now it's time to break it down, because every time that happens, it has a root. Every time those feelings happen, every time those thoughts happen, there is a root. Just like it was ingrained in you, there is a process to uproot it as well. But if we honest, let's talk about it. The R word for many whites have become equivalent as the N word for Blacks. As soon as you say you racist, really, all trouble break loose, because that's what they defend. But I want to go over the book definition of racism, but I do want to shed light on something else about racism. According by definition, racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Okay? So basically racism is, I think my race is better than yours. And the fact that you are of a lesser race, you can do lesser things. That's what it means. And as I was really studying racism, I chuckled a little bit, because the term racism also started the rival or the foundation for the ineffective ally. It was coined by Richard Henry Pratt. Somebody said, if someone gets offended at being called a racist, that implies that they already know it's wrong. That may be true, but it doesn't necessarily mean they are racist. That's the part too, because we'll talk about how it's a little different. Using that definition, it can be around good things too, like Black Americans have more heart or make the best food. The creator of residential schools for indigenous people, right? Richard Henry Pratt. I'll just let you read it. Okay, this sounded good, right? Segregating any class or race of people apart from the rest of the people kills the progress of the segregated people or makes their growth very slow. Association of races and classes is necessary to destroy racism and classism. Yay, Richard, that sounded good, didn't it? Yay, Richard. Okay, then you like, no, Richard. See, this is horrible. Richard said, a great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. Pratt said, In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him, save the man. No, Richard. No, Richard. Y'all need to say it. Y'all just all need to just say, no, Richard. No, Richard. No, Richard. No, sir. No. He thought he was doing a good thing, though, y'all. No, Richard. So whenever you think about ally, don't be like Richard. He had a good heart, right? But Richard say, forget your culture. Forget anything you've ever learned. Be like us, and you'll be all right. Y'all are funny. I can't even say somebody's. But yeah, no, Richard. But see, so he came up with the word, or coin with coming up with the word, or credit with coming up with the word, with good intentions. But Richard done hurt some people in the process. I mean, it's serious, but it's funny. Because this is what we talk about a lot of times when we talk about the ineffective ally. That's what happens. I'm like, oh, he meant well, but yeah. Yeah, yes. So that's where people get that saying from kill the Indian, save the man. This is the guy. Exactly. This is Richard. So if you don't take away, I know y'all gonna take away, y'all gonna think about that later on tonight, and y'all just gonna be sitting in y'all room and y'all be like, nah, Richard, why you say that? Richard, why you say that? He wanted to help these people too. He really thought he was. And see, this is that luxury of being the standard. You can say stuff like that because you really think you do. Like, this is where people start saying, I'm doing good by you people. I'm trying to save you people. No, Richard, Richard, no, Richard, just no. Richard, just no. Just no, Richard. So here is where we're going to spend a lot of our time just really realizing that racism is an ambiguous and at times ambivalent type of consciousness. So we talked about law before. How the law is set up, the law is not set up to give rights, but to restrict them. The law is also set up to point blame on someone. So according to law, you can't sue for a racist culture, but you can sue for a racist person. So many white Americans feel like the only way that I can be deemed as a racist is if it's done by law. And we think only a person can be a racist. But we don't recognize that it is a consciousness, which means it is also, it's systemic. It's a system-wide, deeply ingrained in our system. Some of the things we cannot even recognize. It's systematic. It's carried. It's through our whole system. Right now, that's what we're looking at, this whole matrix of racism that is part of our governmental infrastructure. In the day-to-day way that we handle things is individualistic, which means, yes, it can happen to one person or concerning a person individually. But this is where it gets a lot of people. It's amorphic. It doesn't have a shape or form or anything because it can move throughout our lives, hiding just enough for you not to detect it, but to make a strong impact. So when we're talking about racism, as Black people, we're talking about systemic, systematic, amorphic, and individualistic racism that we have to contend with. We know when we're walking into a room that has a racist culture. You can feel it when you walk into a room. The dismissiveness of how one is treated when they're walking into a room. I have been told, even when I was in executive leadership, I've been told by some whites, like, hey, if you continue to work hard, one day you can move up and be an exec. I'm like, okay, thank you. See, if you stick to this, you got good qualities, but you need to do this. And I'm like, man, I've been an exec for like almost 10 years now. But people, it's just that assumption, like he thought he was doing a good thing, but at the same time, you discredited everything that I was. Have you considered going back to school? Like, I don't want to go back to school. I got a master's degree. I don't want to get a PhD. That's just not me. But they just assume you don't have an education. See, we deal with that. How certain people dress or how they look at you when you wear certain things. The fact that we have laws in place in about 20 states right now that deemed it legal for natural hair. See, a lot of people don't understand that the weight of racism rests on people of color because the laws are in place to give us human rights. Because when America was formed, we weren't considered human. So they had to put laws in place to deem us human. And these laws can be taken away. So when you talk about the pressure is we're still fighting for humanity to be recognized as a human. Most white Americans are fighting for quality of life. We're just fighting for life. Because you never had to deal with the burden of not being considered human. You would never know what that plight is like to live every day knowing that some of these things can be taken away. That's where the pressure is. That's where the aggression is. This is why you have so many blacks trying to please whites, because they feel like if we please enough of them, they will consider us human, so they won't go and change law. Because most whites, if they're not in power, they know somebody who's in power and they can influence a judgment. And if they know that I am human, they won't send us back to live like savages. So we're fighting to live. We're fighting just to be recognized as human, not the quality. Are women in other marginalized groups less likely to be racist because we have seen implicit biases? It has been, white women are easier to accept and deal with racist behavior, but with that, white women also have the survival instinct as well. Meaning that throughout history, it has been like, I'm going to help you, but I'm only going to help you to an extent as long as it doesn't mess up my livelihood. I will look out for you. I will be there for you. I will advocate for you until my husband say no, because guess what? I'm not going to mess up my life. So it only goes historically to a certain extent. And so we have to push past that of being just doing things that are comfortable advocacy. We talk about Amy Cooper, yeah. But it's several people. So when we're talking about racism, guys, this is what we're constantly dealing with. This is the constant weight that is on every Black in America's shoulders right now. There is a racism scale. I would use it just for insight, not use it as Bible, not use it as law, but it gives you a great perspective of the racism scale that some whites could be, or most whites could be on. But the beautiful thing about it is we must realize that we are people, so we have a level of fluidity. So we may go, depending on the issue, depending on the subject at hand, it might be different. Like, we might think all people are equal until they marry into our family. We're like, oh, hold on. I like you people, but don't become my people, you people. So some people have that. We have countless stories of where people, once they got in interracial relationships, they've lost inheritances, they've lost entire connections with their family. No? So those are the things, like if we're really considered equal and we're considered people, why does it become a problem when it's time for us to connect. I've heard one white lady say, well, I just don't want my son to marry a black woman because I don't want him to deal with the problems that blacks go through. I was like, wow, I get it. She was like, I help you all day long. I just don't want to go through the struggle that y'all go through. And I don't want anybody that I really care about to go through that struggle. Some people think that mixed or racially ambiguous children go through life the hardest, so they don't want to produce any of those things. These are the things that we have to contend with. Okay? So let's look at some racism perspectives. These are some of those myths. Racism is not our problem. Stop talking about it. The only reason why we have racism is because y'all keep talking about it. If we didn't talk about it, racism would just go away. That's a beautiful stance to take when you ain't got to deal with it. But racism is our problem. It's something we have to deal with. It's going to spill over somewhere. Racism is about hateful actions and words. The words actually happen and the actions actually happen after they've meditated on those thoughts for so long. Racism is saying nothing. If you allow somebody to go through something unjustly, that's adding to racism. If you have a negative thought about someone just because of the color of their skin. I was reading the transcript on the Ahmaud Arbery, the man who was filming it. And he said, well, when they were chasing him, I assumed that he was wrong. Why is it when a black person is running, he's automatically assumed to be wrong? Somebody about to say something? Why is it that we're good until we get upset? Or we're good until it's against another white person? Racism is white America's problem and their responsibility to dismantle it. I agree. Media has a lot to do with that. Natanya saying that media has a lot to do with the perception. Yeah, I met some people who told me that they had certain programming that portrayed blacks in a certain light. And so if you have seen blacks in a certain light, I used to get all the time like, Jay, you're so articulate. Oh, okay, I'm not supposed to be. You know, it's like we say things and even our compliments, we think that they're really compliments, but they're insults. Like, why shouldn't I be articulate? Yeah, well-spoken. That is another one. But we are portrayed as thugs. We are portrayed in a lot of areas as being less than, or people who always are not doing the right thing. We always hear, if he would just comply. Why do I have to comply if I'm doing nothing wrong? Compliance regulates things. How do you regulate life? Oh, because I look threatening, I need to comply? Because with a perception? How do you comply with a perception? Even other blacks believe the programming towards other blacks. Yeah. There are so many different false narratives that are put out there about who we are. We get it all the time. Every time a northerner comes down to the South, y'all just so country, or y'all do this and y'all do that. And in my mind, I'm always thinking like, why are y'all here? If we so horrible, why y'all here? But I tell you this, I never experienced racism from a Southern person. Every time I've experienced racism, it has been from someone who was Northern. I kid you not. You know why? We can look at New York City, for instance. They got Little Tokyo, Little Italy, Little this, Little that. Everything is segregated. We say we're together, but everybody has their place. So when you move down to somewhere like small little Holly Springs, and it's a hodgepodge of different races and cultures, you're upset because now you're saying, why are you in my place? You don't belong here. It's okay if I visit you, but we don't supposed to be living and cohabitating and going to the same places together. You know? Okay, if I see anyone running from the cops, I immediately think they did something wrong. I see my bias because, ooh, y'all doing it fast. I see my bias because we can't always trust the cops. May not always be right, but be human. The cost of living. As a white native North Carolinian, we hear that too. I'm like, go back. I see it happening more. Bigger schools with children are in groups form. My experience has been in the South, not when I visited northern states. I'm gonna say Natanya is biased because she's from New York. But no, it could very well be. And not saying that not saying that we don't have races. I'm just saying the only time that I've ever experienced it has been from Northerners. It's either been in some type of form, like I don't belong in certain settings because of whatever. So we got to think like how we were raised, what was instilled in us. Like I had a friend who said, well, I never talked to my kids about racism. I taught them that all people were treated equal. I said, okay, well, where did they grow up? What if they grew up in an all-white neighborhood, went to an all-white school? All people are treated equal because that's all they see. When they see something that's not like them, when does that conversation happen? Or when I'm coming over to visit, your kid is rubbing my arm to see if my black rubs off. That lets me know we didn't have a conversation about it. That lets me know they haven't been exposed to a lot of things. Only Ku Klux Klan members and self-proclaimed white supremacists perpetuate racism. We hear that all the time, right? I'm no racist. I don't have a hood in my closet. We hear that a lot. We don't realize that we can perpetuate racist behaviors. We can encourage racist behavior by the things or the way that we conduct ourselves. It doesn't have to be extreme. Subtle racism is the deadliest. My kids went to a poor school where all other parents who had time to participate took their children out. I refused because the more important lesson was people, not books. Thank you, Angela. They do wear hood. They don't wear hoods. They don't wear hoods anymore. They now wear uniforms, shirts, ties, and work in Senate houses. That's a fear. A lot of people talk about the positive and the negative of integration. And one of the negatives has always been you didn't know who didn't like you. At least in segregation, you knew who didn't like you. It was clear. Whereas now you don't know. Someone can be masquerading as an ally, like I said, all the time. And it actually is, I have a cousin who died that way, acted as a supporter, acted as a friend, and actually lured her to her death. Isn't that grouping people together? In what regard, Eric?
From the previous comment, we're putting everybody in the same box. We got to look at each other as individuals.
Right. That is very true. And you know, let me see if it comes up. I'll wait. Racism has to do with intentions.
Hello?
Yep.
So that's not grouping people together. That's just saying that those groups of people have been infiltrated by people who used to wear those hoods. I'm not grouping all those people together. Those people now are the people who make policies. Those people now who are the ones who write legislation. Those people now who are the ones who are policing our communities. I'm not grouping them all together. It just said only Ku Klux members are only Ku Klux Klan members are self-proclaimed white supremacists. I didn't group them all together. Those groups have now been infiltrated with those people.
Yeah, my fault. I misunderstood that. I thought you were saying everybody I thought you were saying everybody in the Senate is that's who it is now.
And again, it's they can say they're not, but when you write policies that are disproportionately impact different communities, then you can't say you are trying to be equal when they're not trying to make sure everyone has access to health care. They're trying to make sure that everybody does not have access to the same education. Then those are racist policies that they're writing.
Okay, so one thing that we want to realize is that the way that we perceive life is based off of our sacred box, right? The way that we respond to things is based off of our sacred box, but also racism takes on many different shapes and forms. Remember, we talked about it being systemic, systematic, amorphic, and individualistic. So it comes in different places. So we can enforce a law that is rooted in racism, and just to keep the people happy, we continue that law for a secured place, but we may not be directly a racist, but we become an agent of racism. And so it's like those type of things we don't spend time thinking about, because we do think, well, my intention was not to hurt anybody. My intention was to do a good job and make sure that the people still like me and I stay in my position. Racism is caused by ignorance. There's a lot of intelligent racists out there, because there's a lot of strategic racists out there too. And we can't just say, oh, every racist is ignorant. No, there are some racists who choose to be racist and know that they're racist. Racism is irrational. I agree. Racism can be remediated through education. That's a yes and a no, because that depends on what you're open to. And if we're not open enough, we run the risk of just shutting down. Like, some of us go through classes and say that we have education or say we have these experiences, but we shut off things because we're saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. That's not me. I don't believe that. I don't do this. I don't do that. Because we haven't confronted our sacred box. Let me see. I agree. Let me go all the way back up. Our experiences are more subtle. For instance, some of our neighbors won't speak to us, and the welcoming of new families into the neighborhood is very different. Yeah, I agree. I think the bad apple mentality stops us from tackling systems. That's right. Every single system we have in this country is built on racist practices to keep white people in power and oppress non-white individuals. The bad apple scenario was completely plausible until this past week. Now we can see the roots to the apple tree are rotten. And then say, yes, Carla, it also depends on what you go home to. You can educate kids all day and then go home to bigoted parents. I agree with that. Or you can also be great parents at home and allow your kids to go to school like my kids and be exposed to children who have bigoted parents. So it's so many different things that we wrestle with on a day-to-day basis that we struggle every day. Every Black struggles between safety and protection. Meaning I need to protect you, but sometimes they're not safe, even when we call ourselves protecting them. Racism will end as we have more and more interracial relationships. Ooh, you have some people that do that. I have some people, I know some people who really believe that, talking about, we're doing our part. Look at us with this beautiful mixed family. Be like, no, you don't hang with none of the black people, or you don't hang with none of the white people. You just hang with that one person. No, that is not doing your part. And I think that actually adds more, because now, we didn't even talk about colorism, we'll talk about that later, but now you're adding a stigma with this child, that now they have to carry this mantle of thinking that they're better than other people because I am the new America. They put out a whole article about the racially ambiguous America that we're supposed to have. That's not ending racism. The only way to end racism is to end racism. Racism is not something that impacts my friends of color. Whew. It's some people that really believe that. I had a whole conversation talking about, Jay, look at you. You're an exec, you're making good money. You don't deal with racism. You are privileged. We'll talk about privilege later. I'm like, man, you just don't know. The man just in New York who graduated from Harvard was called, guess what? An angry black man attacking her and her dog. It didn't matter the degree at that moment. It didn't matter what his experience was. We don't have that luxury of people recognizing that we're degreed or we're credentialed. Racism discrimination is against the law. What else can we do? I just feel like that's I just blame Richard for that. I'm just gonna say, no, Richard. Y'all just tell Richard, no, Richard, no. That's Richard Henry Pratt at his finest right there. Now, the types of discrimination: age, disability, pay, genetic information, harassment, national origin, pregnancy, race, religion. When we started talking about racism, the unique thing about racism with the law, whenever you say that you're discriminated against, you only can pick one. But the problem with racism, it can happen with all of these areas. Depending on the age of the black person determines how they'll be discriminated. There's research that is out there that said black children are perceived 2 times as bigger than white children. Case in point, Trayvon Martin, 17 years old, that's a baby. But he was considered a monster in the eyes of George Zimmerman. It has been shown that you can put 2 kids the same exact age, same height, beside each other, and the black kid will be perceived as being older. Depending on the disability, some blacks are considered just lazy, or faking it, or just want a handout. Equal pay, you should be grateful to get what you're getting. You've come a long way for you and your people. Genetic information, what you know about a person. Harassment. Sometimes it comes in jovial nature, but it still is harassment. Depending on the black and where that black is from, there is discrimination. Africans talk about it all the time, like true Africans talk about it all the time. They're treated like they're low class because they're directly from Africa. And they feel like they have to compete with the African Americans because they're directly from Africa. Pregnancy. Statistics show that black women die in labor more than their white counterparts. And of course, race, and then it becomes religion. We can talk about that all day long. There's so many different arms of religion that have foundations in racism. And a lot of people, when we talk about our sacred box, a lot of people believe racism through their faith or through the interpretation of their faith. And so we contend with all of that. And that's what makes racism so big, because then if we go and try to go before the law and defend and say, I'm being discriminated because of this, and that, You got to only pick one and who did it. Karen said, those are the people who think Jesus was blue-eyed white dude. One problem is that 70% of white people do not have any interaction with Black people. My mom used to tell me it doesn't really matter. One day we'll all be the same color. Also, it also depends on what you go, okay, we read that one already. Yes. So this is the things that we contend with. And then of course, retaliation. Anytime you speak out about any of this, a lot of us experience this every day. You being an ally, several of you have reached out and said, I've lost friends. Several of us who speak out have lost jobs, have lost homes, have lost lives, just for speaking out. And of course, gender, sex, meaning biological sex, because now gender has its own thing. Then of course, that ties into sexual harassment, which is also done in an aggressive or jovial nature. Now, I want to talk about the impact of slavery. If you can bear with me just a few minutes, we can go into it. The impact of slavery still happens. We have what was known as the house Negro, which was the one who was the servant to the whites, to the master. That's where privilege come in based off of your color. This is also the one who probably was raped the most and produced the most mixed children. And so the lighter they were, they also were considered a little bit privileged. And so they were allowed to be in the house. So they were a slave, but they didn't have to do slave work, more of servant work. This produced colorism in the Black community. This also produced a casting system within the Black community. Depending on your shade will determine where you will go. And so a lot of Black families were hoping to have that light-skinned child, because that light-skinned child would be the one that would give them the privileges that they needed. My mom was very light-skinned, and all of her sisters were, but my grandmother was disabled and was dark-skinned. So my auntie used to wear a blonde wig and go to the store and have food delivered to my grandmother's house, because that's the only way my grandmother would get food. She would say, I need you to send it to my servant quarters. The field Negro is also a product of colorism, but he was known as the producer, the strategist. The driver is the one that confuses you guys the most. Because this is the one who was a slave, but he was a supervisor on the field, and he told on all the other slaves, so he wanted to keep his secure position. They have a very survivalist mentality, a very manipulative one, and they're comfortable with complacency. This is the one that confuses and tells us that life is not so hard and try to convince you that it's not that bad for Blacks, so they're not like those other Blacks. This is the one that is still here today that we have to contend with, that will kind of confuse you, and you think you're doing a good job at allyship, and it's really not. These positions are still here. They just come in different forms now. So we made it here. So you just bear with me, because we started 5 minutes late and I'm still doing good on the time. Today is a lot to process. So your 2 takeaways is self-reflection. It's just spend time with yourself. We must challenge ourselves to deal with the roots in our lives and not find shade amongst the branches. This is just the way that I am is no longer a valid response or excuse. We must address ourselves. If not, we run the risk of having a skewed perception of others. Also, observe the various conversations that we entertain. That's all I want you to do this time. Do this tonight. And then number 2, get connected. Get involved with, it should be other, multicultural organizations. If unsure, try a soft transition into various social media groups. We actually have a group, and I'm gonna put it in the chat so you can join that group. And it's called Implicit Bias Group. It's a private group, And I want you to have this, I want it private so you can ask questions and not feel like you're being judged and criticized for them. Okay? I'm gonna yield it over to Garrett because he has a survey link for you guys. Anything you need to say, Garrett?
No, nothing other than it's only about 2 minutes long. I just dropped into the chat, and that link is just to help us for tomorrow. So one thing that worked well, one thing that can be improved, and a takeaway you have. So the link's just in the chat right now. I think so.
So I will post the takeaways in the group. I'm also up under that. I'm sending you guys the link to the Facebook group so you can go ahead and join if you're on Facebook. If you're not on, I sent everybody an email, so you can send me an email and say, hey, Jay, send me the takeaways so I can get those to you as well. We'll see you guys tomorrow. I hope that you really take some time to reflect on some of the heavy things that we've discussed and be prepared to move further tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Thank you guys so much.
So much, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks.
Not a problem. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Hmm?
Thank you.
No problemo. Waiting on some others to leave. A few more. I don't want to remove them because I think it puts them in that weird category.
You can all just chat on the Facebook thread if you want, Jay.
Okay, we'll do that.
Loved it so much. Thank you so much. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay, bye.